And we're getting into a conversation this morning, and many questions that we have, and we want to get a kind of like a blueprint in terms of what exactly could or couldn't be happening. Lynn Mengich is the former chairperson of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, and she joins us this morning in the situation. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
The last time we spoke, it was on your way out, having after served your term as the chair and moving on to other things. But those conversations are still whirling around us, and there's some of the things that we want to talk about today. So Karibu Sana. We welcome you today to the show with today's proverb. We would like to hear your interpretation of it.
Yeah, so today we are in Morocco. They recently came to the country. We beat them, but then again they ended up winning the Chan Championship.
Yep.
We give them their flowers. But when you talk about Morocco, it's a beautiful country. You look at their cuisine, couscous is there. There is a lot that also goes into what propels the economy. Tourism is up there, attracts millions and millions of visitors. But then again, there is also the fact that they export a lot of phosphate that is used in fertilizer. So even here, Kenya, we consume phosphate that comes from Morocco. But let's go to our proverb today. And this talks about parents. Whoever has parents has wings. Whoever has parents has wings. How would you interpret that?
Well, the parents can be anyone, not necessarily your biological parents. So let's begin from there.
Yeah.
So we can see parent as someone who is out there looking out for you and ready to help you. So that then means that if you have such a person, not necessarily biological, but such a person in your life, then it is a win for you because they're out there looking out for you, willing to walk the way with you, helping you through your challenges, and also helping you when you do well. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would see that proverb.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well put, aptly said. Parents is anyone who's out there looking for you and rooting out for your success. Yes, indeed.
Indeed. And as we get into this conversation this morning, so certain things happen. As you sat as the chair of the SRC for the time that you did, of course, there were many conversations that were happening. One of the last big things that you did was the conference on ensuring that Kenya stayed at 35% or below when it came to remuneration or recurrent expenditure in terms of overheads, in this case now salaries and payments and emoluments. Before we get into some of these things that we're talking about, has that 35% been achieved? And are we getting closer to 35 or are we still above it?
The 35% is relative to, it's actually a percentage of the wage bill to revenue. So where we are at the moment, because revenue has actually continued to grow, then we are closer to that number. Mm-hmm. So we're actually very close to that. I don't have the exact figure now that I'm not in SRC day to day, but we are closer to that number for sure because the revenue has gone up.
Revenue has gone up, so closer to 35% of the wage bill. So we should not actually be spending more than 35% of the wage of money that comes in essentially to pay for salaries and those particular overheads.
Yeah.
Now, when we look at that, then the monies that go towards payment essentially comes from revenue that the country makes.
Yes.
Now, this is after the first charge, which is debt. And then now we get into payments of salaries as the second and third charges. Now, there is rarely any extra. And with what you have, just looking for, again, from your experience as SRC chair, when making the decisions to then pay certain amounts or to increase certain amounts, are those taken into consideration against the money that is available or the money that is coming in?
Absolutely. That is very, very critical in deciding how much should go into the wage bill. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the wage bill is anything from basic salary to allowances to benefits. Is the total package that is spent on an employee. So, and this is not an option because it is a constitutional requirement. The constitution is very clear that one of the mandates for SRC is to ensure sustainability, affordability and fiscal sustainability of the wage bill. So that is where the 35% comes in, which is actually in the Act. So it's not a choice, it is a constitutional requirement that you must take into that account. Can the country afford and can it sustain going forward? And the reason why it is very important is because, you have to balance what you spend on wages or the wage bill vis-a-vis what goes to development. Remember, as you rightly say, is the debt which you must pay anyway. It is the first charge. So in balancing those two, you are balancing ability of government to put money in development, in delivery of services, and the wage bill. And that is why it is very important that that balance is always maintained, because if you spend more on the wage bill, more than the 35%, then automatically development will not be it's supposed to be not less than 30%. So it's got to be that balance every other time. It's development, service delivery, wage bill. So which one comes first?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the SRC take into consideration the temperatures at the time where certain things are being done to then say, actually, you know what, an increase here would not make sense, especially when you play it against what's happening economically? Do those things come into play?
Yes, absolutely.
Or is it just number crunching?
No, it's not numbers. You have to also look at the economy. Where are we as a country? As at that point that you're making that decision, what are the pressing needs in the country? What's the mood even of the country? So that is very important. It's not just about looking at numbers, but it's looking at reality on the ground. What are the priorities that the country ought to be looking at the moment? That's why at every given time, the Commission then has to also look at the government agenda. In this case, looking at what is the government prioritizing. So it has to be in tandem with what government has put as its agenda. Yeah.
Okay. Whenever there is a new administration in place and a new session of Parliament comes in now in the 13th, we saw the trend in the 12th, in the 11th, and even in the 10th, that as soon as an administration comes into place, the push for an increment or an establishment of a certain remuneration comes into place. And because there are a lawmaking body, that conversation is had and it is passed. When something like that is passed, does it come to the SRC? And then does the SRC say, okay, well, since you've passed it, we have no choice but to implement it? Or do you serve, or did you serve, or does it serve in an advisory capacity where it says, we know you passed this, but this is then what we are able to do? Which comes first?
The first thing is, before any bill is passed, if it is touching on the wage bill, it is a requirement that SRC gives its input. So it doesn't come after. It should actually come way before. And I recall even when I was in SRC, that exactly what happened, that Parliament would actually write, as part of its public participation and stakeholder engagement, would then engage the different stakeholders. So from the onset, SRC would give its views on that, on the bill. And it's not advisory, because remember, SRC's mandate is constitutional. It's not an advice. It's actually something you must do.
Must do.
Yes. So it will give its you can call it advice, yes, but not in the literal sense of advice that I can take or not take.
Okay.
And that happens upfront, even before the bill is passed. But having said that, we saw situations where even having given that input, a bill may still be passed. And at that point, then the Commission then has another way, which is then appeal to the President not to assent to the bill. If it's ascended, and sometimes it will still go through, then the next recourse would be now go through the legislative route. And that is how, during my tenure, we had quite a number of cases in court that some actually went through that process, and we still ended up in court. Yes.
Okay, because then I was going to ask, then by the time we see, the filibustering that goes along there in Parliament, that then it is with the okay of SRC to go ahead and ask for that extra money.
Nope.
Okay. Nope. All right.
Well, around the month of June, or even before June, and this has been an ongoing conversation. It's a sensitive subject, especially when you're talking about judiciary, for example. And there is a big conversation around pension in this country. Now, judges, in a bill that clearly is seeking to generally, and if you're to look at the packages, they're entitled to improved retirement packages for judges, for example, including enhanced benefits for their spouses and children. If the Judges' Retirement Benefits Bill 2025 is approved by Parliament, initially what SRC was addressing itself to was, look, this is unconstitutional, this is untenable, this cannot work. I think it's in reference to the realities you're saying. You look at not just the mood of the country, but are we able to sustain this? However, there was a change of tune. There were concessions that were made thereafter. Because you're not serving there currently, you may not be able to answer that. But I just want your opinion on just your general view around, and I'm sure you know what the bill entails. For a Kenyan who wants to understand what was there before, so that then we're able to compare to what is being proposed now as the packages for the judges, where are we?
Okay, thank you. Allow me to answer that question in two ways. First of all is to talk about the pension itself. Was that request realistic or not? You know, because we can say you've asked for an enhanced pension, and you have rightly said, what does it entail? It actually entailed two main areas. One was for the sitting charges, a monthly transport allowance, right? If you look at that monthly transport allowance, it's almost that at the end of it, every judge would be getting over 10 million as a lump sum. But then there is also the medical benefit. It also talks about all of them having a medical benefit. Then, as you rightly say, there is an enhancement on what the spouse get. So, but when we look at pension generally and ask ourselves, are we as a country, is our pension where it should be? The statistics globally say that your pension replacement rate should be about 70%. In other words, if I was earning 100,000, when I retire, to maintain my lifestyle, I ought to be at 70. Yeah, it's 70% of what I was earning. That's what the theory, the statistics say. If we look at Kenya, both public, private sector, that figure is ranging between 30 to 40%, right? So, in other words, our replacement ratio is much lower. But of course, there are other arguments about 70. What does that 70 mean? 70 means, for example, you're still going to be paying for rent, mortgage, and all this, which you may not, right? So let's begin with that is, what should be the right pension that an employee should be looking at when you retire? And the second question is, whose responsibility is it to pay that pension? Because that is where the two, the conversations are. So in the first place is to say, asking for more pension is probably not the problem, because our ratio is still not where it should be. Assuming we go for 70, which, as I said, is debatable because it makes a lot of assumptions that I'm still paying for a house, I'm still paying for rent, and maybe you're not when you retire. But if you look at the Kenya statistics, which is 30 to 40%, that probably is lower, right? So from that perspective, when the judges or anyone else said we should increase pension, that is not the real problem. Because yes, we accept that pension probably could be higher, because if you don't have enough pension, what it means is you have retirees who are dependent on others. They're not productive in society. So the question then is, who should pay for that pension? And that is where the question really is. That as an employee, any of us, and you, as you rightly say, this conversation is not just about the judges, but you educate ourselves around pension so that we understand this is who is responsible for that pension. So if you are in employment, you will see that the employer contributes, you also contribute. Now, and that is very important, that pension is not responsibility of the employer alone. It is a joint responsibility. But it also allows the individual to go over and above what the employer puts in and make their own additional contribution, meaning that the real contribution should come more from the individual than the employer. So in this particular case, even as we are talking about an enhanced pension for the judges, the question then comes to who then pays the bill. Yes, you want this pension, you know, it's probably okay. But is it the taxpayer who should pay? Or should the burden be shared? Or should you actually, as a state officer or any retiree, take that burden yourself rather than automatically passing to the taxpayer? So I think in this particular case, that is where the first problem is. Can the country afford? And I saw the statistics from SRC saying that it would be about 50 billion. But that is obviously including the effect on other state officers. I think that's where the 50 billion comes in. So the answer then would be it's not sustainable, right? If we just look at the numbers. But the reason why that is so is also because of the issue about equity. Yes, I would like to have this pension, but you're not the only public officer. There are many other public officers.
Actually, the conversation, before I ask a question to something you've said, is governors are also lining up, deputies are also lining up, everyone is waiting. The moment this passes, because it has a lot of benefits.
Yes.
Among other things, this is beyond just the judges. The spouse is also the children and what they're entitled to. But there are other things about a lifetime insurance cover for themselves and their spouses, diplomatic passports, and access to VIP lounges at all Kenyan airports. Is a lot of these are things, and there's 120 liters of fuel per month for 10 years, and so on and so forth. You're looking at all these lavish packages that go with this, and then you're looking at where the country is. There's a question you asked. You said we need to ask ourselves where this money is coming from. So the 7.5 per contribution from the judges, the government pays 15%. So the 7.5 is the personal, correct? So the 15% is government that pays, but it's not really government, is it? It's you and I. It's taxpayers. Who are going to pay for this.
Actually, you've asked two questions, so let me pick the first one. It is true that once this is passed, and that's, we go back to the question of why judges alone. There are many public officers.
Yes.
And let's start with even state officers, because a judge is a state officer. Can you then pass a benefit only to one category of state officers?
What about the rest?
And what about the rest? It is very, very clear in the Constitution that when we talk matters wage bill, equity, fairness is so key to that. And therefore, that alone is what will give the impetus to the rest. And they will have a legal basis. They will say, fine, you've given to this state officer, we rightly deserve the same. So definitely, it is not going to stop at a judge saying that, this is now where we stop. It means all other state officers will be lining up for the same. And by extension, all other public officers, not just state officers. And that is where the real cost comes in. And therefore, the conversation said it's not just about the cost, it's fairness and equity. Are we being fair? Are we equitable? Knowing that who is paying? The payment is coming from the taxpayer. If it is coming from your own pocket, no problem. Right? But if you are going to ask the taxpayer to pay, then the question is, why? Why should one category of public officers be given this benefit and not the rest?
Sure.
Right? And if we were to extend to everybody, it's just not sustainable.
And
right.
As we also have that discussion, because I remember when you're having that, it was actually to be backdated to the 80s, I think, and as we have that, you mentioned earlier that any decision that is being made, it is in comparison to where we are as a country, how the economy is doing. But here's a question where, first of all, you'd argue judges would get it, but then it will be extrapolated to everybody else. And as we just have the discussion here, can the country afford that? That's the question.
The answer is, going by the statistics of where the wage bill is at the moment, the country cannot afford. We do know that we've got a lot of priorities in education, in the health sector, building infrastructure. So the country, therefore, at this point in time, because remember, this is taxpayers' money, and as a taxpayer, you're also entitled to ask for better services. So have we achieved those services before we go to the extras? So, so when we look at who is paying, it's the taxpayer. So as a taxpayer, I would be asking, hang on a minute, where are we on the critical public services?
Indeed.
Yeah.
On education, on health, even on the infrastructure. We're not there yet. So is this a priority at this point, that a retiree then takes an unfair share of the taxes? So that therefore is, is where the issue about equity and fairness lies in.
Even for years, isn't it?
From what Aseta is asking, there is a key feature in this conversation is where you have inflation adjusted. So the funding model has an issue, because in terms of sustainability, then you're looking at, okay, can we afford this in the next 5 years?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, you're only looking at 5 years. What about inflation in the next 10 years? Because when I was looking at this, the benefits for this pension, are they funded directly from government revenues, or is there a dedicated pension fund?
In government today, we have two types, and even in this bill, there are two types of pension plans that have been running. Right, for a very long time, even for the civil service, it was a defined benefit, right? And even for the judges, you will see in that bill there is an element of defined benefit for those who are there before. Then there is the defined contribution. In a defined benefit scheme, you guarantee a pension, and the employer funds it. In most cases entirely. In some cases the employee may contribute a bit.
Yes.
But the burden is really on the employer. But currently, with the superannuation scheme, which you may be aware for all the public servants, which was launched a few years back, it's now a defined contribution. That is where the 7.5 comes in and the 15% comes in. So in that a scenario which is defined contribution, then you define the contribution of the employer and employer, and your pension is purely funded from the savings, from that 7 and 15%. You do not go then to look for more money. It is strictly funded from that. Such a scheme is very good, and in fact, what is being proposed in the bill for the judges going forward, the 7.5 and 15%, is actually aligned to what is already happening in the rest of government. That is what the superannuation scheme does. So such a scheme is it's good in the sense that the employer, or in this case the government, will not then be looking for more money because it is funded from the scheme.
But the devil is in the detail. In this deal,
yes,
there's something that I think is being missed here. This question of inflation.
Yes.
The argument here is when you tie the pension to inflation, then this is going to strain the public budgets, especially when you have periods of high inflation. For example, if inflation spikes to 6% or even higher, as we've actually seen in the recent years, then the cost of pension adjustments could then exert more pressure on government finances. And these government finances, we've just said clearly, it's actually our taxes.
Yeah.
So our taxes will be part of the adjustment of inflation to this pension kitty.
That is true. In fact, there is no pension. I am not aware of any pension, even in the private sector, that would guarantee an adjustment for inflation. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to pension, at the point at which there is an adjustment, if it's a defined contribution, there is an actuarial valuation that is done,
yes,
right? And it is through that process that there is a recommendation is made on how you adjust the pension, depending on the funding of the scheme, whether the scheme can actually afford it. But it is purely funded from the scheme in a defined contribution. Now, the problem with this bill, it is asking for an automatic cost of living adjustment, irrespective of the funding. So who is going to fund? And that is why it is not usual for any pension scheme to have such a clause. The pension schemes will talk about adjustment of pension, but it does not specify and guarantee an inflation-based adjustment. So I agree with you absolutely. That is not, in fact, something that we can say the country can afford. It's not even just about affordability. You can afford today, but what about tomorrow and the day after?
Yeah.
So it's not sustainable, it's not affordable, and it's not even consistent to what happens in many pension schemes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You earlier mentioned global statistics, and usually when we talk about these emoluments then being increased in whatever percentage, it's usually tagged to and says, well, this is what the global average is, this is what the global statistics are, and this is what a global system essentially would demand that you are paying to retirees or to pensioners or whatever the case may be. But we sometimes fail to remember that those global statistics are often pegged on what economies have been able to achieve. That those global statistics and the mean, the number that you arrive at, is usually after a nation has achieved a certain level of economic development. Those who have set those numbers are not dealing with a basic feeding problem. They're not dealing with an infrastructure problem. They're not dealing with a lot of the things that put pressure on the Kenyan economy. So taking all of those things into consideration, can we really compare on that end and say, well, this is what the global standard is, we should apply it here, without considering that the global standard demands that a certain level has already been attained? You can't do multiplication without the basic addition. You can't do division without the basic subtraction. So can you say we want to achieve this without having achieved the foundation?
No, absolutely not. And yes, global statistics, then the question is, where is it derived from? Is it from the developed countries or the developing countries? And most of that statistics is actually looking at the developed countries. So, but even within some of the Western countries, they've not reached that 70%, right? It's almost like an ideal aspiration that you're saying, if everything is equal and we are developed, then 70%. But the reality on the ground is very few countries have reached there, and we are not there as a country. And therefore, ours is to say, if I'm in Kenya today, then I should be operating between the 30 and 40%, because that is our country. That's where we are today. And that's what it should be, not the 70%. We can't afford. We are not there yet. And as I also say that if you look at that 70% statistics, it makes a lot of assumptions of the lifestyle of the retiree. So if already I have a house, I don't need the 70, because if you look at the consumer pricing index, where do I spend? Most likely it is rent, then it is education of your children, then food. So that again, there is a lot that one can argue around that statistics. But to answer your question, we are not there yet. We should not be looking at those numbers and saying our replacement rate should be at that level. We have to live within our means.
A sticky question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do we then ever see that the SRC, especially for political appointments, they're state officers, but they have a political tinge to them? Do we ever see the reduction of this pay? That SRC has done a survey, has done a study, and has said that this current situation or this current demand vis-a-vis the current situation economically, the country cannot afford it. Let's be serious about some things and say, in light of that, it is the recommendation of the SRC to review these payments downwards in order for us to allow other things to happen. Is that ever a situation that has come across?
You see, I think that it starts with, remember, everyone has an employment as a contract. It's an employment contract, isn't it? So if you look at employment contracts worldwide, you don't really reduce pay. It is even if you look at ILO, it's not something that anyone would say today you reduce pay. If you are to reduce pay, and this is now going to the legal requirements, it has to be a conversation with that employee. And it did happen during COVID, that actually employers had to sit with their employees and say, look, given the COVID situation, we can't afford, we will reduce, and it can happen. So it is not something that SRC or any employer would just wake up and say, we are going to reduce salaries. Because also remember, today we are to talk about reducing pay. If you've got a workforce that is so underpaid, then they will not be productive. They will be busy trying to look for what Kenyans call a side hustle to make ends meet. So no, it is really unlikely that even as SRC would be saying, let's reduce.
I want to look at a situation where so there is this bill that is being penned down, and definitely SRC's opinion would be sought with regards to this. But here's a situation where, after SRC's opinion has been given and this bill passes in Parliament, regardless of what SRC has said, then what's the next course of action?
Well, the next course of action would be for the SRC to go through the legal process, the legislative process. They can go to court and have that again go to court, but again you would be saying it's about the judges, so will there be a conflict? And I remember during my tenure as the chairperson, we had such a scenario where there is a case we actually took to court, and it is still about the judges. So yes, that would be the only recourse, and it would test our processes. Can we be objective? And I hope they will be objective.
Because I'm looking at a situation where we've stated that judges have lined themselves for this to pass. But remember, down the line, members of parliament as well are looking forward to that. So what are the chances that members of parliament would shoot this down if they themselves know they would get benefit if this passes? So then goes to speak to the realities that we face as a country and the purpose, service, delivery and intention there is to serve the people of Kenya truthfully. So are we likely to see that members of parliament would stand and say, based on what SRC has advised, we will not pass this, knowing very well that down the line they would benefit from this?
Your guess is as good as mine on that one. You see, the responsibility of parliament is also to look at whether the country can really afford this. So my hope is that they would look at that as well.
Did they ever?
They say hope is not a strategy.
I agree.
This parliament never works with the assumption that they really, really care about the economy. And, just a quick follow-up to Aseto's question. It bothers me that we've had successive parliaments awarding themselves retirement benefits, salaries. They will set it themselves. It's a very unique situation because I've not seen any employee anywhere who gets into an organization and actually draws up a contract and says, this is how much I want to get paid. The question then, because we already know what Parliament does and what it continues to do, where does SRC draw the line then between independence and political pressure? Because we've seen that pressure many times.
Let me first correct that Parliament does not set their pay, and they have not done that. SRC has always set their pay. They have always not been happy about that pay. And you might recall 3 years ago, there was even one specifically where they did attempt to award themselves a house allowance. That went all the way to court, and it was clear it was reversed, and they had to pay back that money. So it is not true that Parliament sets their own pay. And it's also not true that SRC allows it to happen. If they have gone to court, it has been reversed, they have paid back. So that is the reality of the situation, that our judiciary system is working. It works. So I would then say, there's still a recourse. Assuming it goes through, then SRC can still do the same.
Okay. So what instances did you experience during your tenure when members of parliament then made a direct suggestion to SRC to say that here we needed to tweak things? Remember that question that I asked Lynn was towards these appointments that have or rather, even elected positions that have a political tint. Because it does appear that every time we do see these requests for increment from specific sectors, it's not usually everybody all at once up in arms asking for an increment, right? But do you remember instances whereby they would have said, you know what, we're spending a little bit too much here and we can actually review? I seem to remember when ECD teachers, during your tenure, their pay was significantly reduced. It was. And then we ask ourselves the question, these are children who are being taught, but these teachers are working just as hard as anybody else. But we see that this was reviewed, and it was reviewed downwards. So how does that kind of situation work, or was it not within the SRC purview?
It was. Okay, you've asked a few questions, so let me go to
answer both. Yes.
Yeah, the first one was about parliament, whether they actually come in and say we think our pay is low, we need to review. The answer is absolutely no, because pay for state officers goes through a 4-year review cycle. That 4-year review cycle is initiated by SRC. They go through the review and they will simply say, when parliament comes in, this is your pay. So that's the process. But let me speak to the specific one you've talked about, the ECD teachers. There was no reduction of ECD teachers at all. Their pay was never reduced.
Okay.
And we did try to explain to many people what happened very briefly is that when it comes to ECD teachers, there was a scheme of service that was developed by the Council of Governors jointly with other stakeholders, and they came up with a scheme of service. That scheme of service then had a structure of salary for ECD teachers at different levels, right? So you have an ECD teacher who has just started, another one who's been there for 10 years and so forth, right? And also which is based on your responsibility. I could be an ECD teacher, but I'm also have administrative responsibilities, okay? But what happened in that case is when it came to mapping ECD teachers to that career progression, a lot of the mapping was wrongly done. Whether it was deliberate, we did not really quite know. But you found that teachers who actually have no admin responsibilities were all put at the higher level, right? So what then happened is there was a process where SRC went through with COG to say, let's try and get this right. What should be the actual remuneration? So what happened was purely just mapping them to the correct grade, where they had, some counties had definitely overgraded. They had put everybody at the level of an admin, and they were basing it mainly on certificate rather than the job. And remember, you don't pay for a certificate, you pay for the job done. So it was a realignment to ensure that you are paying people based on their grade.
So if somebody with this realignment was earning 100,000 shillings, with the realignment they were now earning 25,000 shillings. As an example, did we see that with the realignment somebody then would be earning less than they were before the realignment?
What we saw, because we had to go through that process to understand with the county governments, are there counties that had actually paid different remuneration, and yes, there were some, but there was nowhere that said you must now reduce. It was left to the counties to decide how to handle the contracts, because they had to realign but make that decision. As I said earlier, if I have a contract, I can't just unilaterally wake up and reduce my pay.
Sure.
Yes.
Can you, sorry.
Yes,
I want to ask, what is the current pay for ECDs, if you can remember what you had set it for per month?
I know it is, the lowest was at the minimum wage, which should be around, I can't remember of it, but it should be around 12,000.
Yes, so it's about 12,300
yes, it's around
or
there.
so.
Yes.
So, and this is full-time teacher. in school. I'm just looking at the numbers, and this is at the county level. That's set at that level because we know that at the county ECD is handled by the county at that level. Would SRC be able to step in, and this is in the time gone by and even in the current period, would SRC be able to step in, for example, and say, come on guys, we're looking for an additional 300 billion shillings to pay judges, right? Because of a suggestion that they've made. But here we have an ECD teacher who's earning 12,000 shillings per month, and we know that it's not going to be subjected to tax. However, there are certain things that they have to pay from these 12,000 bob. The likelihood of them taking home less than 10,000 shillings after these things have been removed, then it's very high. Would SRC then be able to step in a situation and say, okay guys, we need to look at these numbers because in today's economy, an adult earning 10,000 shillings and doing a full-time job doesn't really make sense. Does that ever come up?
Let me put it this way. The issue about how much an ECD teacher can earn is also based on what can the county governments afford.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, it always goes back to what is available for ECD teachers in each county government. And I can tell you a lot of the counties even were struggling to pay that amount of minimum wage. Some of them were paying even way below. So on the ground, you then have to look at what money is actually available. Now, to answer your second question about can you take out money from, because remember, judges are state officers, they are paid out of consolidated fund. ECD teachers are paid out of the money from the county government.
And where does the money from the county government come from?
Well, it's from the shared revenue.
Exactly.
But remember, the shared revenue it goes through CRA has a formula. So you can't say if I removed from here, I would automatically take it to the other. It goes through a very different formula of how that shared revenue is arrived at. So I don't think it automatically says if we don't give the judge, then the ECD teacher.
And isn't that the problem, Lynn? Isn't that the actual problem that we're looking at? Because look at other areas, for example, where we have the same issue. When we look at bursaries, for example, we've got a CDF, we've got an MP's fund, we've got the NGAF, we have, okay, I said NGCDF, we have NGAF, we have a Member of Parliament's bursary, we have the President's Fund. We have all of these things, use a different formulaic approach to get things sorted, whereby we could actually, you know what, put it in one basket and send these children to school. That is an example that I'm giving. But here we say, you know what, we're going to look for 300 billion shillings to pay these guys in retirement, but that's formulaic because it comes from, the consolidated fund. But here we are, and in the same boundaries of the country, there's somebody who is working a full-time job and is being paid less than 10,000 shillings after whatever taxes you want to take out. But then we're going to say, well, it's formulaic on this side, and this other side, it comes from shareable revenue.
Let me put it that way. When it comes to the wages, the remuneration, it's not about saying what comes out of your shareable revenue or not, because actually those two formulas are completely separate and they don't speak to, we don't look at it like that. But what the commission would look at is mainly about what the country can afford generally. Remember about the 35% and how you go through that. So it's not so again, what determines what review is done is going to be guided by the constitutional principles that are already set in place, right? But what I agree with you entirely is about equity, because what you're raising is also a question about equity. Is it fair that another role is earning this vis-a-vis another? So the question of equity and fairness will always be central to any conversation. And therefore, at the beginning, when we started this conversation, we did say, if we are to review, for example, a post-retirement benefit for a certain group, then the question of fairness comes in. Then you ask yourself, how fair is that? Is that equitable, considering everything else? Yeah.
There is the question of politics and remuneration in the country, and I would just take you back to a time when there was a debate on MCAs in the country, and I remember during that time the way it was a debate even with KRA, and that is at the time when former President Uhuru Kenyatta said MCAs deserved to have car grants and not car loans, and I remember that entire conversation. And as we speak today in terms of politics and SRC, one asks the question, how critical is political goodwill in enabling SRC do its job without interference?
You see, the first question is, does SRC require the goodwill, or is it bound by the constitutional mandate? Because a constitutional mandate is not negotiable. It is what the citizens expressed, and it is in the constitution. So SRC, therefore, is bound by the constitutional mandate. The issue about does it require the goodwill to discharge its mandate, I think is answered by the constitution. It is no. That is why they are given independence, and they are given the principles by which to make that decision. And definitely political goodwill is not one of those.
So at that point when you find the president was making these decisions or just giving his advice on that members of county assemblies deserve these as members of parliament, that does not have any bearing or does not in a way seen as coercing the commission?
It may, and I'll tell you why. You know, sometimes the way things work is, like in that particular case, because I was there,
Yes.
there were already conversations that had been going on between the SRC and these MCAs for 2-3 years. And actually, they had been going through these conversations. At that point, in fact, the commission was close to making that decision. So sometimes you have to say what informed what in that particular case, because the commission was already in the process of making that review, right? But somehow it happened in a political environment. And of course, anyone listening to it will think, okay, these two are closely tied. So sometimes it's also someone could decide to take advantage of what is happening for their own reasons, because for sure that process was already happening. The issue about being equitable, remember, as I said, there is a question about equity, and it is true that there had to be some sense of equity, because one arm of government, the national side of the legislature, was getting something that the other didn't get. And remember, even in the end, it's not equal in amount, but the principle had to be equitable. So that process was near the tail end when that pronunciation happened. Yeah.
Even as we wind this down, Lynn, I mean, just looking at then what the things moving forward that the commission has to then do in terms of creating a balance, do you ever feel that the commission is hand-tied to create balance amongst some of these things? Because you want, I would imagine that, I mean, no, not that imagine, there are individuals at the other end of the spectrum. They're human beings. Would you think that, you know, you want to create a system of fairness and balance? I mean, somebody's earning 1 million shillings against somebody who's earning 12,000, you know, and you are balancing between all of these people. Is the desire to actually make it more fair? Is that the desire, or is it just paper?
No. I will be very specific again, and I'm sure even the current commission will continue doing, because they are bound by the constitution. One of the things during my tenure that we did was to put in place policies to ensure that any review, there is a consistent move towards equity, right? And when I talk about equity, it's not just about state officers vis-a-vis another state officers. The bigger problem is within the public service, the civil service itself. If you look at the salary of someone working in the civil service and a state corporation, right, the pay differential is huge. Right? So we've put measures to ensure that every single review, there's at a certain level it is frozen, right? A certain level, actually there is no review if you've reached a certain benchmark a certain level so that the rest can continuously come up.
Okay.
So that's what the commission has been doing, but you can't do it overnight because of the cost implication. So the hands are tied in the sense of the cost implication, but the SRC's hands are not tied in terms of progressively achieving what it ought to do, which is fairness, equity in pay.
Lynn Mengich is the former chairperson of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission and has been our guest this hour, helping us to understand a little bit more of what goes on in the workings and looking for equity and balance in pay. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Show continues.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.